Well guys, as I'm sure you know by now, the Retro VGS Indiegogo campaign has been abandoned, and what's left of the team is going back to the drawing board. But now that the dust has settled, I wonder, why did people support this idea in the first place? In the last episode we went into the mind of the man behind the Retro VGS. Today we look at the fans. One of the ways in which the Retro VGS project continues to fascinate me is the fact that there is a fan base for a console which currently has nothing to show for itself other than Jaguar tooling, shiny 3D renders, and a repurposed dining room table. Of course, their fanbase has taken a toll through this journey, and it's never been as strong as it was before the $350 price was revealed. And even while their product is aiming for a niche in the market, it still has to fight a series of uphill battles to make itself relevant in today's world. But to the future citizens of Retroland, none of that matters. So why do people support a project like this that has so many competitive disadvantages? Well, if you listen to their supporters, you might find out that they don't see these disadvantages at all. I think I figured out what's going on here, and as much as I wish I could blame some form of mind control or the occult, in reality it's actually just a piece of marketing wizardry called the underdog effect. This is a powerful marketing spell used to reel in buyers. When you boil it down, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Some people tend to favor underdog competitors over more established and successful alternatives. And by some people, I mean a lot of people. In a 2010 study published by the Journal of Consumer Research, up to 89% of participants favored a product with an underdog story attached to it, over the same product without that brand biography. I'd like to have 89% of people like my product, so where do we sign up to be an underdog? Well, the study explains that there are two factors that define an underdog in the market. The first is high external disadvantages. This could be in the form of low capital, or not having a lot of brand recognition. It could mean a lot of things. And the second factor is having a high degree of passion and determination. There's no doubt that the Retro VGS team has both of these factors in spades. Now, studies have shown that the underdog effect is real, but the interesting part is the way it bends your thought process and influences your decision making. If you're trying to pick a winner, you would usually avoid a disadvantaged competitor. And sure, there are some situations where supporting something that has high external disadvantages can be beneficial. For instance, if you're gambling, then betting on the underdog could lead to higher winnings. However, we're talking about the consumer market, and we usually try to be smart and purchase a product from a market leader with a proven track record. After all, who wants their pacemaker to come from an underdog brand? But when the underdog effect is in full swing, our mind stops seeing those negative traits as a disadvantage and instead makes us believe that they're an advantage. It flips around a term that we were using to describe a company's handicap and turns it into an endearing attribute. Obviously, something isn't making sense here. Why would consumers feel that it's in their best interest to support a weaker contender at their own expense? For that explanation, we go to a 2005 study conducted by the University of South Florida. This study brings a very relevant theory to the table. It states that we support the underdog because it taps into our inner concept of justice, and any violation of the underdog's perceived entitlement to success would be an injustice. To put that in a less wordy form, we believe in fairy tales. This inner concept of justice has been nurtured into us from early childhood. Jack and the Beanstalk, David and Goliath, and almost every Disney movie are examples of a story where an underdog finds justice in this world. And the Retro VGS funding campaign is a fairy tale as well. Even Indiegogo calls it a story, and fairy tales are entitled to a happy ending. They want to sell you a fairy tale because when a fairy tale is in danger of having an unhappy ending, that arouses feelings of injustice that needs to be corrected. And Mike Kennedy is no fool, he knows how to play that card.
Yeah, and the packing game, Adventures of Tiny Night, which is a game that I'm a part of, which I'm an honor. It's an honor to be a part
Adventures
of.
of Tiny Night.
Yeah.
We're really excited to have this game, and from the start, I always thought this game was sort of, I felt some sort of connection with this little knight going out there, going after all of these dragons. I didn't know there'd be so many dragons, though.
Right.
The dragons in my mind were, Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, and these Android systems and mobile.
But of course, this isn't a fairy tale. I'd really like to find out if Tiny Knight starts his adventure by raising 1.85 million gold coins from the villagers with a pinky swear that he'll make it all worth their while later. But I've got to admit, even I got swept up in the fairy tale part of it. I've been a huge critic of this console, but even I got sad when I heard that the Indiegogo campaign would be abandoned. So you see, it's very easy for someone to get caught up with these feelings. But there is an antidote to this form of madness. There's a way to remove the underdog bias from your purchasing decisions with a simple mind trick. I'm gonna give that to you because after all, it's dangerous to go alone, so take this. In that study conducted by the Journal of Consumer Research, their results found that the underdog bias could be eliminated by asking the participants to make their purchase for someone else, not themselves. Just like that, the underdog bias was gone. It makes sense, too. When you're buying a gift, you suddenly don't care about whether a product came from someone's shed, kitchen, or a van down by the river. They're not going to know anything about the origin story behind the brand. It forces you to focus your purchasing decision on value and utility. You want a gift to be useful to the person you bought it for, and that eliminates the underdog bias. Some of you may interpret this video to be a rant against all crowdfunding projects in general, but you'd be wrong. I think Kickstarter is great, and there are plenty of products that can survive this test. Our last product review was for a device that would easily pass the gift test, so I challenge you to use that test, not only on the next Retro VGS campaign, but for any Kickstarter you consider backing. My problem is with products that have nothing to offer but a story of a few guys in a garage who have been working so hard but have nothing to show for it, because that sort of pitch appeals to a perverse sense of entitlement and justice that is easily exploited on a crowdfunding site. As I've always said, be careful out there. There's one more side to this fairy tale I wanted to explore, and that's its happily ever after ending. If you follow Mike's beliefs on predestination, then the road to success has already been paved, and is just waiting for the funding campaign to succeed. He certainly is a dreamer, but you might not be the first to have these illusions of grandeur. The games he hopes to bring to the Retro VGS are all throwbacks to the classic era of gaming. But is Mike himself a throwback to someone from the classic era? Was there an underdog salesman who wanted to kick open the door to this new video game craze and ride the wave of the inevitable success that was sure to follow? Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to Pat Roper. Pat Roper's story is similar to Mike's in some ways, but different in others. Just as the Retro VGS was born after Mike noticed the recent booming collector market, Games by Apollo was born in 1981 after Pat Roper noticed the booming new market for home game consoles, and he decided to create games for the Atari 2600. Now, Pat Roper didn't try to create his own game console, but he did become a game publisher as the Retro VGS team hopes to do. Another eerie similarity between the two are their attempts to duplicate someone else's success. Mike is obsessed with the Ouya. It's a strange type of love-hate relationship that's fascinating to watch. It makes his blood boil every time people accuse his product of being just another Ouya, but he'll take any opportunity to remind people about how much money their crowdfunding campaign raised.
I mean, I'm not spending all of this time and effort to sell 5,000, units.
Right, you're trying to sell.
We really want this, we really want this thing to go, the way of the Ouya. If this Kickstarter does well, I mean, I don't know if it'll approach Ouya numbers or not. Depending on how well the Kickstarter does or doesn't. If it does really well, and we, pull in Ouya numbers, for God's sake, if it's possible, we certainly don't want to have any issues like Ouya had with a really crappy controller.
The team seems to know about his Ouya fetish as well.
And again, we didn't, not bringing Ouya into this because, again, but they use crowdfunding. That's where the similarities stop, okay, right off the bat. But they did not show a prototype either. She said they had one, and they showed a dev board. But I know we're not going there, but we're being compared to that. So I just wanted to quickly say, if you go and watch their video, no prototype. It was smoke and mirrors.
Similarly, Pat Roper was obsessed with Activision. Pat was inspired by their success and their ability to outdo Atari at their own game, and he felt that he could outdo Activision. After all, how hard can it be? Ed Salvo was Apollo's chief programmer. He recalls Pat Roper's prediction. Activision had 26 million in sales its first year, so Apollo would have 27. Activision had a campus with 7 buildings, each 7 stories, so Apollo would have 8 buildings of 8 stories. Pat Roper got some cash from investors and made some exciting games such as Shark Attack, Final Approach, Infiltrate, Wabbit? And a game about losing your luggage. And of course their best-selling game of all time, Space Sons of Bitches. I genuinely don't want to know how much people paid for this game when it was new. You know a game is really boring when the most exciting thing that happens is a glitch. I would rather eat 99 cents. Oh god, sorry guys. I had a flashback there. So yeah, their library games sucked. Sometimes Pat Roper would tell his staff to just make a clone of a successful game, and even those failed. I challenge anyone out there to find me a developer that consistently released more terrible games than Apollo did. And of course, Pat never made a game console, which is the main focus of the Retro VGS project. But, while Games by Apollo was in operation, Pat Roper had another business venture, which I like to refer to as his own Retroland moment. When looking for a solution to traffic problems on Dallas' Central Expressway, he felt that the answer would come in the form of designing and selling two-man helicopters to the general population. It's hard to say that sentence while keeping a straight face. And there are so many parallels to that same type of thought process that would justify the Retro VGS. Ed Salvo had to point out to Pat, drivers have problems in 2 dimensions with lines. Can you imagine 3 dimensions with no lines? The failure to think 2 steps ahead is similar to the Retro VGS plan to require bug-free games, or their hope that modern franchises would return to 8 and 16-bit graphics. It's completely out of touch with reality. Plus, traffic is a very small annoyance compared to a solution of buying and maintaining your own frickin' helicopter. Just like digital-only indie games are a small annoyance that don't need a $350 console to correct it. Both of these solutions are a strange variation of killing a housefly with a shotgun. Just because you claim to have found a solution, that doesn't mean it makes sense compared to the small burden of just dealing with the problem and reaping the benefits. Meanwhile, back at Apollo, they built up their inventory to sell 27 million units, but only sold 9 million. After just 1 year in operation, and with $5 million in debt, Pat Roper's dream had turned into a nightmare. A sheriff paid a visit to the company and chained the doors shut. The company filed for bankruptcy soon after. So what happened here? The guy had a high degree of passion and determination, even though he also had many external disadvantages, otherwise known as being an underdog. But even with all the best intentions, that still failed to make his product successful. So the lesson here is that you can't just pitch an idea for creating a new gaming empire and promise that everything will fall into place after the funds arrive. The fairy tale underdog story is a lie. It's much harder to accomplish than you think. And just because you find the means to turn your dream into a reality, that doesn't entitle you to success. Apollo had the means to pull this off back when cartridges were a very contemporary idea, and they still couldn't make it work. However, there is one final and very important difference that separates Pat Roper from Mike Kennedy. Pat Roper was very harmless to gamers. You probably never even knew about him until I told you. Yes, I would hate to be the kid who found an Apollo game in his Christmas stocking, but compared to all the shovelware that companies were dumping on the Atari at that time, that's hardly a sin. Gamers were not hurt at all by Apollo's collapse because they didn't have a personal stake in the company. Crowdfunding didn't exist back then. If anything, when Apollo went under, it was probably nice to have one less mediocre game publisher on the market. It was investors who placed their bet on the underdog here, and that gamble didn't pay off. With crowdfunding, it's now an entirely different ballgame. For the Retro VGS, the people who stand to lose the most are its biggest fans, not speculative investors. It's fun to root for the underdog, but as we saw with Apollo, that fairy tale can turn into a nightmare real quick. And again, this video is not an indictment against crowdfunding. There are plenty of good products just waiting to be crowdfunded, but there's a big difference between an idea for a good product and an idea that just reminisces on someone else's success. It's nearly impossible to repeat history, and Retroland seems unlikely to become a utopia of early 90s gaming. Instead, it seems destined to become a small-scale repeat of the North American video game crash. It's okay to be a dreamer. Good ideas have to start somewhere, and there are thousands of Mike Kennedys and Pat Ropers in this world. I'm glad that the Retro VGS team is revising their console, and I hope the Indiegogo campaign gave them a much-needed reality check. For all you know, their revised console might work, who knows? I might even become a backer. But they need to sell us a console, not a fairy tale. But be careful, because this guy's got the dreamer's disease and it can be deadly to your wallet.